I'm so excited in on Sam to start with.
Okay, go.
Hi, my name is Crevatas. I'm interviewing Mr. Doran. It is January 25th, 2002. We're at First School in Government. Mr. Doran, what wars, theaters, or campaigns or locations were you in?
I was in World War II.
Okay, cut. Sorry. Can you back up just a second? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Hi, my name is Crevatas. I am a student at First School. I'm interviewing Mr. Kenneth Doran. He is a World War II veteran. We are at First School in Inducted. Mr. Doran, what was your highest rank you held?
Well, I retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1978 on my 60th birthday.
What was the units or ships you were assigned to?
Well, overseas I was assigned to the headquarters of the 458th Bombardment Group in the 8th Air Force in England. I was there for a year and a half.
Okay, I think, Sam, do you see where it says Part 2 service history? That's understandable, okay? So you know what we're going to start with? What's the first thing you're going to ask him?
The branch of service.
And
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Crevatas. I am a student at Christ School. I'm interviewing Kenneth T. Doran. The date is 25th of January 2002. We're in Christ School in Doran. Mr. Doran, what was the branch of service that you were enlisted into?
Well, I started my military experience when I was 18 years old. I was living in Cahoes, New York at the time. I had graduated from high school the previous year in 35, and in 36, a friend of mine said, hey, this was during the Depression, by the way, hey, did you know that if you joined the New York National Guard up at the Armory on Main Street in Cahoes, you can get $1 a week for attending a drill? And I said, oh boy, that sounds good to me. So I went up and investigated, and I enlisted as a private in Company B of 105th Infantry, which was headquartered in Troy, across the river. And I served as a private for a year or more, and then my company commander, Captain Forget, he said, say, you go to college, don't you? And I said, yeah. He says, that means you know how to read and write. I said, oh yes. And so he said, I'm going to make you a company clerk. And he said, I'll advance you to corporal. I said, that means I get $2 a drill instead of one. I said, yeah. So I ended up as a corporal. And in 1939, just after I had graduated from college and had my first teaching job assigned to me down in Roscoe, New York, in Sullivan County, I got word that the 105th Infantry, in fact the whole 27th Division of the New York National Guard, was being federalized in prospect of World War II, and that the Company B was, and common with all the rest of the 27th Division, was going to have to go down to Louisiana for federal training. Well, I was the oldest of 5 brothers and sisters in our family. My father was out of work at the time. I was the only one working. And I said, there's no way I can go to Louisiana for federal training. And so I received a hardship discharge at that time in 38. Then in 41, of course, we had Pearl Harbor. And I was sitting in a boarding house in Roscoe, New York on December 7th, a Sunday, preparing to have my Sunday dinner served by the boarding house lady. And the woman who was to be my wife, Kathleen Miller, was the only other boarding house resident who was there with me at the table at the time. The others had gone home. And so the news came through on the radio about the attack on Pearl Harbor. This electrified everybody, of course. And it became immediately plain that I was going to have to continue my military service in some form or another. So the next year, 42, my wife and I were married in July 42. I enlisted as a voluntary officer candidate in the administration branch of the Army Air Corps. And I was sent to Miami Beach, Florida. Very hard living down there in a vacation hotel. I had 1 month of basic training, during which I became a drill instructor because I knew all the routine, of course, order drill from having been in the infantry, National Guard for 3 years. And then I spent 3 months in officer candidate school, again at Miami Beach, and I was graduated in March 43 as the second lieutenant, Army Air Corps. And I was sent for training to the Special Services School in Lexington, Virginia, on the campus of Virginia Military Institute and Washington and Lee University, which are adjoining campuses. And in the chapel there, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Confederate forces during the Civil War, is buried. And they have the stall where he kept his horse, Traveler, until he died, and was a place replete with military history. And I was sent to Special Services School. That's the branch of the service which is concerned with the morale and welfare of the troops. Everything from handing out ping pong balls to arranging USO shows, arranging athletic contests and that kind of thing, because I'd been active along those lines in college. I'd played basketball and had been in dramatics, and the classification officer seemed to think that's where my talents lay, so he assigned me to Special Services School. My wife and I spent 2 weeks at Special Services School in Lexington, Virginia. And then I received my first live assignment, which was to Fort George Wright in Spokane, Washington. And I served for 3 months there as an assistant Special Services officer. Was sent back again to Lexington for another course of 2 weeks called Information Education Officer. And ultimately ended up assigned to a newly formed Air Force heavy bombardment group, which was assembled at Tonopah, Nevada, the Air Force base there. And from there, on New Year's Day of 1944, I was shipped by train back to Orangeburg, New York, down in Rockland County, which was a shipping base for the European Theater of Operations. I didn't know at the time where it was going to be sent or anything of the kind, but in due time, I was put aboard a ship, a noble ship, 400 feet long, a converted banana boat. The Navy was using anything it could to move troops in those days. And they moved in a naval convoy across the North Atlantic in the month of January, which is an experience I don't wish on anybody. It took us 2 weeks with destroyers surrounding the troop ships to make sure that no German submarines got within range of us. And we were finally arrived at the Firth of Clyde in Scotland, near Glasgow and Edinburgh. And we were put aboard a troop train there, which took us down to our eventual base, which was in the northeastern corner of England, in Norfolk County, and it was just outside Norwich, which the English, by the way, pronounce Norwich. And we found ourselves on an established base, which had been a fighter base for the Royal Air Force during the early years of World War II. And now we, with our Liberator bombers, B-24s, were assigned to this base. And I was there for a year and a half. Finally coming home in July 45 after VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, and in preparation for going to the Pacific Theater to finish up the war against the Japanese. But while I was home in August 45, of course, the first 2 atom bombs were dropped, and the Army immediately began to discharge all the personnel it could. And so I was separated in September 1945 and went into the reserve, which I continued in until I retired in 1978. That's a long story.
What were your general duties?
Well, general duties as a special services officer, I had an office right in the middle of the base. And if soldiers knew that they wanted to send home money from their monthly pay, they knew they had to come to my office. That was one of my jobs. I was personal transfer officer on paydays after the card games and so forth that the personnel had, and they knew how much money they had left to send back to mom or their wife at home. They'd come to my office, and if sometimes in a little field safe I'd have $20,000 to be transferred back to the U.S. That was one of my jobs. I was also a soldier voting officer in 1944 when President Franklin Roosevelt was running for his 4th term as President of the United States. And I knew President Roosevelt personally because my father had worked in the governor's mansion here in Albany when President Roosevelt was governor here. And he and Eleanor had invited our family down for a Thanksgiving celebration. And when my my younger brother sat on President Roosevelt's knee, and we enjoyed a Christmas tree, and I particularly remember that they served us ice cream molded in the shape of a turkey, and they treated us to a movie called Whoopi with Eddie Cantor, which was all the rage at that time. So I had very pleasant memories of President Roosevelt. Anyway, I was soldier voting officer, among other things. And then the day-to-day routine would be to cooperate with the American Red Cross officer on base. He was a civilian, but he was in charge of bringing in entertainment functions and seeing to dances being arranged and that kind of thing. We worked together on that kind of social activity. And I also got to know for the first time in my life a real live softball pitcher. Sergeant Rosenberg in our organization had the fastest softball delivery I'd ever experienced. I went out to catch him once. He nearly knocked my hand off. And he was great. We used to have tournaments and that kind of thing. I had played tennis in college, and we had tennis courts on our base, so we had tennis tournaments and all kinds of things to make the troops comfortable. We ran movies, weekly movies, well, general morale activities. That's
Do you have any combat experience, and like when were you first under fire?
Well, of course, in the base, in the situation I've described here, we weren't doing any hand-to-hand fighting, obviously. The infantry was doing that, and over on the continent. But our base was subject to air raids. In fact, funny thing, we had been instructed before we went overseas about the need for the greatest secrecy about where we were. We were not to release this information in any way in our writings back to our loved ones, because the saying was, loose lips can sink ships. And we knew that German intelligence was constantly focused on the activities of the Army, Navy, and Air Corps. And when we first arrived at our base, the very first night we got there, Lord Haw Haw came onto the radio. Now, he was a German. He was a man of English birth, but who was working for the Germans. He came on from Germany, and in his broadcast he said, we would like to welcome Colonel James Isbell and the 458th Bombardment Group to Horsham St. Faith, AF 123, England. We hope you'll have a productive stay. And you know, our mouths dropped. Here the German intelligence knew everything about where we were and who we were and so forth. And that very night, we had an air raid. The German fighters came over, and the searchlights went on, the sirens went off, and we went to a bomb shelter in the basement. And that was not uncommon. We had many German air raids. And in one case, they followed our bombers back from a mission over Europe, and they followed them right back to our field. and we on the ground could stand there and see the German fighters firing at our bombers, and our bombers frantically trying to get permission to land, and they wouldn't let them land until they were sure that there was no danger of crashes on the field. So we were in combat while we were subject to combat conditions. We were subject to air raid. And later, in 45, the Germans were developing a new weapon, which they called a V-2 rocket. The V-1s had been flying bombs which had been used over London in the early stages of the war. They were propelled by their own motor, and they would puck over, and then the engine would cut out, and they would dive to an assigned target. That was something. You could prepare for that. You could hear the puck-pucks coming, but the V-2 was a brand new thing. This was a self-contained rocket which would arch up from the French coast in the German emplacements and over the channel and come right down in Norfolk County, which was their prime testing area. They were trying to get zeroed in on this type of thing. And so these V-2s would come in absolutely silently. You had no idea whatsoever that it was coming until it hit. And that kind of thing became pretty scary. One of my bunkmates was the base fire marshal. When the first of these hit in our area, he was sent over, and nobody knew at the time what it was all about, but they picked up all kinds of wreckage, copper tubing, and so forth and so on, and pieced the thing together and figured out what it was. And this kind of thing was pretty frightening. If the Germans had had a little longer in 45, they might have done considerable damage to England, but as it was, they were pretty much plowing up potato fields and the general landscape.
Did you receive any injuries or wounds?
No, I never was injured in any way.
What was daily life like?
Oh, daily life for ground personnel like myself was largely routine. Got up in the morning, had your breakfast, went to the office, did what you had to do, and so forth. That was so for ground personnel, but for the flying personnel, it was quite a different matter. They were assigned to bombing missions over France and Germany, and they had to be up early in the morning to be briefed on where the mission was, what units were to be deployed, and so forth. And then they'd have to have their planes loaded with bombs, and they'd take off. B-24 was a sort of a clumsy-looking airplane. It was bulky and like a boxcar. And in fact, the very second plane ever to take off from our group crashed with a full bomb load less than 2 miles from the end of the runway, and killed everybody aboard, and fortunately it was in the middle of a golf course, so there weren't too many houses right around it. But these flying personnel, they took off on these missions, and You never knew whether they were coming back or not. And unfortunately, too many of them did not come back. And it was hard to keep up morale in a group that was constantly having replacements coming in from the United States, come in to replace those who had been killed or disabled in these missions.
How does your equipment work?
Well, my equipment was consisted of typewriters. They worked very well. But our B-24 bombers, for the most part, were good equipped and were highly regarded. But the B-17s, which were a different configuration of an airplane, they were made by Boeing, and the Liberators were made by another aircraft company. The B-17s had been in the earliest stages of America's participation in European theater, and they got more publicity than the B-24s. One of the persons who had gone through basic training or officer training with me was Clark Gable, the film actor. He became a gunner in B-17. There were several other actors who had their place in the 8th Air Force, but they were all B-17 operators. One was Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart was a colonel. As a matter of fact, I participated in a court-martial as a court-martial member, and he was chairman of the military board conducting his court-martial. He came to our base, and I had a chance to rub elbows with him at the time.
How was your equipment compared to the enemy's?
Well, I think in the fact that we won the war and they didn't emphasizes that ours was superior. We had a huge war effort, and Waterbury Arsenal up here participated in that to a great extent, preparing naval cannon at the time. A neighbor of mine in Cahos worked at Waterbury Arsenal at that time. He was a machinist, and we admired the great work they did. In fact, all of American industry did in supporting the military effort.
What was your unit like?
Well, it was a rather an ordinary unit for the circumstances. Take the number 458 bombardment group. You understand that it was a fairly recent one. It wasn't the first or the second or anything at that time. And so it was assembled at Tonopah, Nevada, as I said, and a regular Army Lieutenant Colonel, James Isbell, who later became a general, he was assigned as commander. And then he assembled his staff, and they were, like myself, for the most part, 90-day wonders, as they were called. 90-day wonders. That means that you became an officer and a gentleman in 90 days, 3 months. And sort of irreverent way to refer to us so I put in so much time and effort into getting this training. But anyway, we were, for the most part, civilians who were converted into military people in a very short time. I would say that our unit was above average in efficiency.
How were your officers?
Well, that's what I described was the situation. You had a regular Army commander who was dependent upon converted civilian personnel, and he did the best he could, and we did the best we could to support his mission. And we guessed that he must have done it sufficiently well because he was promoted to colonel and eventually to general.
Did you receive any decorations, medals, or commendations?
Oh, routine medals, I guess. A medal for the American campaign operation. I was in the American theater operations from 42 to 44, and then a medal for the African European and Middle Eastern campaign. That was 44 to 45. And then everybody who was in the armed services at the end of the war got a victory medal. And then later on, when I went into reserve, I got the Air Force Reserve Medal. But these were rather common, ordinary medals.
What was the most interesting or inspiring thing you experienced during your service?
Well, it's the first time I'd been away from home to any extent when I went into the military service. And what I observed as I went to various places in the United States that I'd never seen before, like Washington and Utah, the Middle West, and the Southern states. And then when I went on to England, where the people were living under wartime conditions and had been for 4 years or more, I was impressed with the unity of purpose that seemed to exist throughout the whole United States and throughout England. Everybody was out to achieve our purpose in overcoming the threats that have been placed against us by the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, and Italy at the time. I think that's what impressed me most. And it all comes back to me now that I see the unity of purpose that we seem to experience now after the 9/11 tragedy in New York and Washington.
What person or persons do you remember back from your service?
Well, I really can't single out any person or persons. I think there's anybody that impressed me most. Let's put it that way.
What experiences left the greatest impressions on you?
Well, the experiences that made the most impression on me were any in which my life seemed to be in imminent danger. And I can think of 3 situations, all of which involve bombs of one kind or another. The first one, I was on weekend leave in London, and the housing office there assigned me to spend my 2 nights on the 9th floor of a 9-story building, top floor of a 9-story building, in just outside the center of London. And so I got into my billet and went up to the 9th floor, and I was lying on my cot there looking at the ceiling, and all of a sudden I heard the putt-putt of a V-1 bomb overhead. And I'm lying there looking at the ceiling and waiting to find out whether these putt-putts were going to keep going or not. All of a sudden they stopped, and that was the sign that it was going to dive to earth. Lo and behold, it struck about 100 yards from the building I was in down the street. And every building on that street had its window panes blown out. But I was lying there wondering if it was going to come right down through the roof, hit me. It didn't. That was one experience. That made quite an impression on me. Second was the situation in which I was walking into the city of Norwich from our base, which was just on the outskirts. Our base now, as I found out since I went back to visit a couple of years ago, is now the municipal airport for the city of Norwich. But I was walking from the base into the center of the city, and I was going down a fairly broad street with a fairly broad sidewalk, and just intent on what I was going to do, go to a movie or something. When I got into the city, all of a sudden there was an awful explosion. Seemed to me as if it was just across the street. But the tree, waiting for some follow-up to it, and there wasn't anything. And I didn't hear anything or see anything. And so I walked on, and ultimately got back to the base. And when I talked to my friend, the base fire marshal, he said that a V-2, an experimental weapon of the Germans, had just exploded in the suburbs of Norwich. And that was my first introduction to what a V-2 was. Those rockets, incidentally, became the basic models for our NASA program, our airspace program in the United States. Colonel, well, he wasn't colonel, he was a civilian, Werner von Braun, a German scientist who had had much to do with devising this weapon in Germany, was transplanted to the United States, became an American citizen, and he set up the whole rocket program that we have since experienced. That was the second incident. The third incident, I was officer of the day on one occasion. This assignment came around about once a month for us. And the officer of the day is responsible for circumnavigating the field in the Jeep to see if the sentries, we had security all around the air base, see if the sentries were awake and on duty. At midnight, I went out in the Jeep with an enlisted man driving, and as we got to, we went around the perimeter track of our base, and as we got out there, we discovered that they were loading bombs on the planes for the next morning's mission. And we chugged along. Before we got to the first sentry, all of a sudden we came up and back of a bomb lorry, or a truck, as we would call it, with a trailer full of 500 and 1,000-pound bombs in a rack. And they were going to turn off and load these on a plane. Well, the perimeter track went down into a little gully and then up the other side. And this truck was ahead of us. And as he went up the upslope beyond us and we started down, all of a sudden one of his bombs rolled out of the back of the lorry and started to roll right down the track towards us. And we were, you hear about the deer in the headlights, that was us. We were looking at this thing, and suddenly it rolled up on its nose and made a little curlicue and went off to the side. And so we spoke about it afterwards, about the danger we were in. They said, oh, those bombs weren't loaded, they weren't fused until they're put in the plane. We said, well, we didn't know that. And we said, furthermore, we knew that at one of our neighboring bases, similar unfused bombs had gone off. As a matter, a whole truck full had gone off and destroyed all the buildings on the base. And so we thought that perhaps there was our reason for being afraid wasn't too implausible.
Do you perform any unusual services or duties?
No. Okay. My pleasure.
Okay.
I always liked it.
What impact did your military services affect the rest of your life?
Well, I'd say that it made me more loving of my country than I might otherwise have been. Having been through World War II, and then having Vietnam come along, and the Korean War before that, and so forth. I was in the reserve at the time. I might have been called for either one of those, but I wasn't. I think it made me more loving of my country than I might otherwise have been.
Thank you.
My pleasure.